We look to the federal government to fix everything, and they can't fix anything. Instead of playing defense, we got to start playing offense. One out of every $5 in America has a touch on healthcare. The biggest reason for personal bankruptcy is healthcare expense. Is our healthcare system good the way it is? Absolutely not. The greatest word in our language is why. The greatest question that we should be asking about everything is why. We've got to take the money out of healthcare. Will Big Pharma or will the big system let it happen?
I am your host of the Blueprint Banter podcast, Derek Lyons, and with me today is Eric Kohlsdorf. Eric, I'm going to let you sort of just introduce yourself, I guess, in terms of your businesses, your current role in the insurance world, and just kind of what you have going on right now.
Right on, yeah. I've owned a brokerage firm since 2007, and before that, I was in the insurance world since 1988, and got into that. Long story, maybe we'll talk about, but and then in 2015, I decided to diversify, I guess, and I got into childcare. So bought a childcare center, and now it's 3 of them around the metro, and yeah, we're just doing that. Last year, back to the insurance world or my brokerage firm, I was the president of a national association of brokers, about 100,000 or so members across the country, and was elected to that in 2020, 2019, and just worked my way up. Did a year as the president, traveled all over the country, seeing what's going on in healthcare in different regions of the country. So,
which is obviously a very popular topic with the political landscape nowadays, and it'd be interesting to pick your brain a little bit on that, and just sort of, not that we have to try to influence people either one way or the other, but just what things do kind of affect us in our daily lives and in the workplace for sure. So we're shooting this podcast out of Des Moines, Iowa. I've been told that we can't keep this too like regional, like we need to make sure, whether that's true or not, but did you grow up in this area, or have you been in this area your whole life?
Yeah, I pretty much, my mom and dad moved from Southern Illinois when I was 4 years old, right before my birthday. And, I grew up in Ankeny, so just north of Des Moines, and I've lived here my whole life, really. After I was the youngest, so after I graduated high school, my parents moved away, and I stayed.
Yeah, how many brothers and sisters do you have?
Yeah, I got 2 brothers. One has passed away, but my oldest brother, who passed away, lived in Alaska, off the grid, middle of nowhere, from 1982 on. And then my other brother moved away, and then is now back in Ankeny, where he raised his family.
Okay, that's awesome. What was the time frame of you like growing up then, going through elementary school and Ankeny and all of that?
Yeah, I graduated high school in '86.
Okay, and
Ankeny's like 80,000 people now. I think it was maybe 15,000 if we're pushing it back then. One high school, and basically 2 roads, First Street and Ankeny Boulevard, Highway 69 going through. So, yeah.
No, seeing the growth for anybody that's grown up and seeing the area kind of come into what it is now over the last 40 years or so, that would be pretty incredible to watch. I know a lot of people, even in the Urbandale area and Waukee, and metros surrounding the Des Moines area, talk about, there never used to be anything west of the interstate. And now it's just, so those stories are pretty fun for sure. When you were growing up, did you always sort of feel like you were going to be a businessman, so to speak, or, were there things that sort of cultivated that along the way? I think that's one of the most interesting topics for me is when you hear, you see somebody in a profession or doing what they're doing now, but it's like, how did that person sort of get there? Most kids, they want to be a fireman or whatever, right? And then things happen to us throughout the course of our childhood and life and sort of shape us into who we are. So what are some stories like from your childhood that you think led you to that?
I don't think my childhood was any different than others, boys back then. I was going to be a pro baseball player. There's no question in my mind. I got as far as college. I tried out for the Reds, Cincinnati Reds, but I wasn't good enough. Couldn't hit a slider. Saved my life. I had a good arm and I was fast, but you got to be able to hit the ball. So, but I wanted to be a baseball player, but growing up, my dad was an entrepreneur, and he owned clothing stores, men's clothing stores around central Iowa. He actually, what brought us up here when I was young was he got transferred within the Kmart industry. And he ran a store on the east side of Des Moines. And so we lived in the little town of Ankeny, outside of Des Moines, the suburbs. But what I think what shaped me to today was seeing him, when he left Kmart and started running clothing stores and being an entrepreneur and trying to make ends meet. I think that kind of, and listening to him talk and things at home with my mom, ingrained in me business, and making, like I said earlier, ends meet and trying to, earn a buck.
Yeah.
In America. So
Did your mom work at that time also?
So she did varying jobs. She was more of an office assistant, and then she got a job in the Ankeny school districts as a resource person. So she helped, the teachers if they needed something typed up or whatever. And my brothers went through high school, and she worked there, and then she left there before I got there. So where they had mom kind of looking over their shoulder every day, I didn't have that. So I was pretty, I got to go crazy a little bit.
I mean, because that would have been, through the 70s and then into the 80s, around that time. I mean, is it fair to say that it was like 50-50 with maybe two parents working outside of the home or mom staying home? I mean, was that common?
Yeah. I mean, through my childhood, my mom always worked. And when you think about the 70s, I mean, we had massive inflation under the Nixon and then Carter administrations, and even into the early stages of the Reagan administration. So I grew up, and every household had two incomes coming in. Mom and dad were both working. So, and I didn't see it back then, but just trying to juggle me going to elementary school and somebody being there. I think that's probably why my mom got a job at the school system, in the schools, because she could be at home in the summer when I was home and my brothers were at home. So, yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting for sure. And especially, again, with, a lot of political talk, people talk about what it takes to make ends meet at home. It's funny to see things sort of get categorized and in different sectors and groups of people just get labeled like, well, this is what it takes for this household to make ends meet. And it's funny when we sort of all get grouped around election time, because it's like, wait a second, I don't fit into that mold. But anyway, so, growing up through the 80s then, I mean, was one of the things that interests me the most is sort of, kids nowadays, I feel like, when you go to get out of high school, you have to go to college, get a degree. And it seems like, if you're a girl, maybe you're going to be a nurse, or like for guys, I'm going to go get my business degree, or there's all of these things that sort of are like status degrees in my mind, or of what the typical or what you should be going into field, the acceptability of that. What was it like in that landscape of, I mean, what was a young man expected to do once you graduated high school?
Yeah. I mean, back then it was, you got to go to college. Yeah. Right? Everybody had to go to college, and where are you going to college? And it was really interesting, because when I was 17, like I said earlier, I was going to be a pro baseball player. Yeah. College wasn't on my mind, other than I was going to go play college baseball somewhere, maybe before getting drafted or whatever. So I had no idea what I was going to do, where I wanted to fit in, what my profession was going to be, because again, I knew I was going to be a baseball player, right? That's the only thing I grew up doing. I mean, if there was a ball, I was throwing it, shooting it, kicking it, whatever, so it was really interesting, but everybody did it. Everybody went to college, and I think it's kind of similar today. I'm dealing with it. I got a senior in high school right now, and he doesn't know what he wants to do, but it's expected. You're going to go to college, and you're going to major in, this, and you're going to get a job, and you're going to do this the rest of your life. And really, nobody should be defined by what they're going to do at age 18 for the rest of their life.
Yeah, you're asking a kid to just essentially set the next 60 years of their life like in motion. And
Yeah.
the whole concept of that's wild.
Yeah.
I understand coming out of, the push historically made sense, right? Because knowledge is power, and of course becoming more educated makes you a more well-rounded human being, and all sorts of things. Like Martin Luther King, and where some of honestly the inspiration for this podcast came from was like Martin Luther King's blueprint to life. And when he talks about that, one of the things when I hear that speech, and I think it was in Philadelphia, maybe when he gave it, I hope I'm not wrong on that, but he talks about sort of like the type of person you're going to be versus being defined necessarily by what you're doing. And it amazes me that that's not more common still to this day. A lot of people are like, when I decided I wasn't going to go to college right out of high school, I mean, people just like,
what?
You fucking loser,
Exactly.
And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, and I have this story of when I was getting close to graduation where I like threw my pencil down on the desk and I was like, I'm going to be more successful than anybody in here, and like stormed out of the classroom because I was pissed. It's just like, you have no idea the fire or drive that I have just because I'm not like following this little journey. So what did you, when you transitioned then out of high school, obviously once baseball sort of fell through, like how did you pivot then into your next, like that next stage of life?
Yeah. So, pretty crazy. In 1988, I got into a serious car accident, and, at that point, baseball was done for sure. And previous to that, I was diagnosed with diabetes right as I graduated, getting ready to go to college. So trying to throw a life upside down, you can do it by a health diagnosis for sure. And that's not whether you're 18 or you're 80. I mean, a health diagnosis can change a lot. But I was working at a restaurant/hotel. And my buddy comes in. I'm doing the overnight shift, and works 7 to whenever. And I'm folding towels, and he comes in. And he's like, "Hey, guess what?" And I'm like, "What? What's going on?" He got a job at this company called The Principal, which if you're in Des Moines, The Principal, and anywhere really that it's a big insurance company, 401k provider, whatever. And I was like, "So you're going to be in a school? You're going to be teaching? What are you doing?" And again, I'm 17, 18 years old, 19, whatever. No, he said, "No, man, I'm going to be doing retirement stuff, and I'm making $1,000 a month." And I was like, "What? You're making $1,000 a month? That's $12,000 a year. I mean, that's crazy talk. How did you get that job?" And he told me, and the next thing I know, I'm applying for a job at The Principal, and I get a job for $1,000 a month at The Principal. And I thought I had hit the home run, man. I was like, "This is awesome. Now I've got a job. I've got benefits. I don't even know what benefits are. I'm 20, whatever." So I'm calculating premium rates on the financial side, doing health benefits and calculating how much individuals should pay for their premiums for the insurance, et cetera. And I did that for a couple of years, and I'm like, "Man, this is no good. I'm in an office. I got windows on the corner that I can't even see out of. I'm in a cubicle. My space is right here, and I got to get out." It drove me crazy. So I ended up at that point going back to school and getting a degree at Iowa State, and I became a Cyclone at that point, and worked for Principal up in Ames for 2 years, where they helped me pay for college, and talk about trying to make ends meet and calculating everything. Got my degree in finance, business finance, and the rest, I guess, is history after that.
So you went out and tasted a little bit of work life, right? Like you got into a professional role, albeit whatever level I guess you were. But is that what sort of, you're like, "Hey, I see other people sort of in this industry succeeding and excelling at what they're doing, but maybe I just need to go get a little bit more background help, go get that education specifically for this." Like, is that how it sort of shaped for you? Because going back to school for anybody, it's not easy necessarily once you get sort of out of that flow. And I'm sure it wasn't super common back then.
Right. you know, back to the points earlier, you know, I was going to be a pro baseball player. That's all I wanted to do. I had no fallback. I had no idea, you know, and when the baseball thing fell through and I had the, you know, the car accident, or I was just kind of meandering right at that time. I was young and diabetic, and I was mad at the world because I had to take shots every day and whatever. But then I got the job and I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do. But after 2 years of doing that, I'm like, this is not me, man. I want to be outside. I want to be talking to people. I want to be, you know, with others and experience life a little bit more. So my avenue, after talking to my boss and saying, you know, this isn't going to work, I got to get out of here. You know, at the time she said, well, and I had told her I was going to go to Iowa State, and she said, well, there's a Ames principal office. We want to keep you in the family, so to speak. So I'll see if I can get you a job up there. And so I went to school and worked basically 30 hours a week at principal, and I went to school full time for 2 years and graduated in '92 and ended up coming back to the home office where I could make more money. And again, I'm like, okay, it's more money. I can do stuff what I want socially, because now I'm making at that time $25,000 a year with a college degree. And I was like, all right, I've hit the home run again.
The governor
You know,
from
I went
Arkansas
from
just
12
got elected. And
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. And at that point, you know, I knew I followed politics because my dad and my mom, growing up, ironically, they were Democrat and Republican, or my mom was a Democrat, my dad was a Republican. So kind of followed and was involved a little bit and watched Bill Clinton and how charismatic he was, talking to people, whatever.
I think people forget a little bit. You know, you see him out, recency bias, you know, has a way of really swaying us one way or the other. But I mean, the guy was smooth.
Oh,
you
yeah.
watch some of those old speeches and
Yeah.
incredible. Well, I do want to dive into the politic thing a little bit, but as far as this conversation goes, though, so I mean, you sort of when you graduate college, then in your you know your early 20s, was it an immediate sort of switch where you're like, hey, like I'm like business mode Eric now kind of was engaged and you're taking life a little bit more seriously. You're sort of over the hump of getting that diabetic diagnosis and like ready to run kind of?
Yeah. I mean, when I graduated, you know, not trying to pat myself on the back, but I had a mission at Iowa State, and I graduated third in the school, the business school. So I don't know what, you know, Magna something or whatever, third highest GPA in my class, and I was driven at that point. I had seen life making 12,000, you know, and I had done, you know, my baseball world, and I thought the only way to do anything is to be successful at it. You're going to be the best baseball player. You're going to be the best basketball player. You're going to be the best nurse. You're going to be the best, right? You're going to be the best business guy, the best entrepreneur, whatever. So that's how I was hardwired. And that probably comes from athletics and seeing my dad just working unbelievable hours to be successful. And so that I took that to college, and after college, I took that back, you know, I said, all right, whatever I do, I've got to know the most, and I've got to have the most drive, those two things. But really, as I look back, I say a true leader has a vision, right? And at that point in my life, it was my vision to be successful. And others have the same typical, you know, they have a vision for what they want to do, and they got to concentrate on getting there, right? As an entrepreneur or as a business person or in the insurance world, when I was leading the organization known as NABIP, it was set the vision for where we want to be, and not want to be tomorrow, but what we want to be long-term. Where do you define success? Where do you want the industry to go? And where do you want you to go? Right?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that a lot of people can, and especially kids, like going into school, right out of high school or whatever, going into college, and a lot of people are getting college credits in high school now, whatever. But before you get out into the professional world, a lot of people, you know, I think 99.9% of people want to be quote unquote successful, right? But you have to know, my high school government teacher, he used the analogy of like, you have all of this energy, but you have to have traction. Like a car up on blocks with the accelerator all the way down is just ripping and roaring. But if it's up on blocks and the tires aren't hitting the pavement, it's no good, right? Like you can have all the pent up energy in the world, but if you don't have the traction of like where you're actually going, or the vehicle, so to speak, then it's sort of pointless. And so I think having a targeted agenda like you did then, I mean, what did that look like? Was the financial landscape at that time in such a way where you're like, I see my route, or I see where I can be different and creative?
Yeah, man, that's a tough question.
Or did it take you a while to sort of get into it and then you're like, this is where I can win?
Yeah. The interesting thing is, I don't know that anyone grows up and says, I'm going to be in the insurance market, right? I'm going to do the insurance thing.
I think we're all taught to actually hate insurance, aren't we? Like,
Yeah.
Insurance broke.
Insurance, what's that? That's the most boring thing. And who does that, right? But we all need it eventually, right? Whether it's life insurance, we're all going to die, to help our family, or whether it's healthcare, we're all going to end up at the doctor for something. Maybe not when you're 20, but maybe when you're 50 or 60. In my case, was when I was 18 and diagnosed with diabetes. But it's really an interesting thing. I mean, it goes back to what you said about yourself. You were driven to be successful, and that's what I think is important. It's not what you're doing, but the drive to be successful at it, or to buck the trend. I don't need college. I don't need a degree to do it. Matter of fact, when I was at Principal, one of my first bosses said, I have an art degree. Not me, but he had an art degree, and he was in the insurance world. And that's, people just looked at the accomplishment of getting a college degree and said, this person's driven to be successful, so let's give them a chance. And that's not to say somebody who doesn't go to college isn't driven. They're just driven in a different way. And I know a lot of people who didn't have a degree and have been very, very successful. You're obviously one of them. But again, it goes back to, where is your drive?
I think that is important. That is a really good point of like, no matter what situation I'm in, there's something inside of me that is just going to be as good as I can be. And I want to try to excel in that, and I often try to sort of search for like fundamental values, because I think, the cool cars and material things and whatever, I mean, that can all get blown out of proportion, but fundamentally, day in and day out, because it's been proven that discipline is far better than motivation, right? Like you can get motivated, amped up one morning, the next morning you got to wake up and do it again though. Mm-hmm. And that's fucking hard, right? So having just the innate ability to just want to go win and just be a little bit better, I think it's not something that maybe everybody has, but it is enough. And I think if you can sort of find that, then like whatever you're doing can be fruitful, right?
Right. Well, and it's individually designed, right? I mean, your success is different than what I feel is success, and what the next person down the road is. And that's the funny thing when you talk about politics in America, where I just fundamentally disagree with how certain things are, that everybody thinks that they need to help the less fortunate person. Now, if it's less fortunate in terms of they need housing or or a meal, that's one thing. But to say that a person who maybe makes $30,000 or is making $25,000 like I did out of college or whatever, to fundamentally say that they're not as well off as somebody else is so biased, in my opinion. They might be the happiest person in the world because they're successful at 25,000, whereas another person might be driven to start a company selling books and turn it into the largest company in the world.
Yeah, and that's why, and the interesting part of that is socialism has been known to fail everywhere. But yet there are certainly people who are really grasp onto that idea that everything should just be like spread equally. And to your point, I worked at a printing factory, Wallace's. R. Donnelly ended up buying them. But we printed like the forms, like when you got the triple layer forms from FedEx and had to sign on them, then you got the yellow copy or whatever. Yeah. So like we printed those forms, collated them and whatever. And it was terrible. Actually drove me to go back to school. I went back to college for a semester and a half and then ended up dropping out. But nonetheless, it opened my eyes to a different world and gave me perspective. I'm glad I did it. But the point of this story is there were people there making really good wages that had been there for 25 years. Their retirement was stacked, and they were the type that loved coming in on their shift, like jonesing with the boys and, seeing the same guys that they've saw there for 15 years. And they probably had a really awesome bass boat maybe at home. They had, maybe they were big camping people, and they had the coolest fifth wheel camper that was in town. Right. And like, that was their thing, was just living for the weekend and going camping, and they fucking happy people. So like, and there's nothing wrong with that. Right. But then people that want to sort of go against the grid or the grind and do something different and more shouldn't just have to be penalized because somebody else doesn't.
Right. Well, 100%. I mean, it's, I deal with a lot of employers, and really I'm in the human capital business, right? So I'm helping employers set up benefit plans for their employees. And I've talked to employers that say, we got Joe who doesn't want to make any more money. He's happy with where he's at. His life is set. He can work a certain number of hours and go home and do whatever he wants to do. He's not trying to get rich, but he's happy. Right. He's full, right? And then there are others who they look at the neighbor next door and say, why do they have it and I don't? And there's two ways to go. You either figure out how to get there personally, find a job, work extra hard, whatever, or you turn to the government. And unfortunately, in our political world, we've got a lot of programs that the government has instilled because they think everybody is like the latter, and they want to be like the Joneses next door.
Yeah, and sort of creating victims where victims might even not necessarily exist, right? Like kind of like pushing that mentality on some folks, for sure. Speaking of that, and when you're working with employers, that has to be sort of difficult. I mean, there's no right answer type of question, but in your belief, is it sort of on the employer to set up a scenario where an employee can do more or achieve more within their role if they want bigger and better things in their life? Or do you think that it should stem from the employee sort of like pushing and creating value maybe beyond what they're asked to do now, show that worth, and then go forward? And I think in my mind, I can see both angles of it. Obviously, being an employer, I want to make a path where everybody on our team can be more successful. But I don't know that's always possible 100%. Right. So just like, what's your overall kind of thought on that?
Oh, man. They say it's the destination, or it's the journey that counts, not the destination. From an employer and an employee perspective, as the employer, I think that you have to know the employee personally, because as much as you think, I want this person to be a leader in my organization, if they don't want it, they're not going to get there.
Yeah.
But if they do want it, and that they want it, and they tell you, there's again, in my opinion, being an employer at a daycare and 3 of them versus also running an agency that helps employers, the lack of communication, I think, is the biggest problem. And problems may be a strong word, but and lack of communication, I mean lack of interest in the employee. We come into the job and we're like, I got this meeting and that meeting and this meeting and that meeting, and I don't even have time to get to know this employee or that employee. And they're coming in going, oh man, I got to do these things. And like you, printing off and collating, in triplicate paper. You probably didn't get to know your boss very well, or you might have, but other people are, people, right? And they want to go meet everybody and talk to everybody. So it's really interesting. I think that the idea of we're going to do annual reviews and you get a pay raise once a year, I think that that's just foolish.
I do too.
I think it's bogus. if a star is working for you and they need a raise, give them a raise.
See, I've always hated that sort of like super structured, like if somebody's working their ass off and doing above and beyond, but you have to wait like 5 more months because that's when the review hits. That's bizarre. It probably sort of causes a rift and what forces people out sometimes. But
I'll tell you a story. When I was back after my graduation, I was back in the home office at principal, and it was my turn to go through my, review. And I sat down and I was talking, and everything that my boss at the time said was that I was excelling and better and da 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 da. And again, not trying to pat myself on the back, but he said, so we're going to give you, and I don't even remember what the raise was, but it amounted to like $150 a month. And I was like, that's not enough. And I looked him in the eyes and I said, that's not enough. And he turned red, because that's how you do it here. You're in the upper this quartile of employee, and this is what the raises were. And I said, that's not enough. I got to find a new job. And it took him aback. But, within about 3 months, I was gone. And I transferred to another organization, a family member organization of the principal, where I was out and about, and I had topside unlimited. I was in a sales role, and the more I could be successful there, the better off I would be. But back to the point of...
Well, hold on a second, though. I want to use that specific example is really important, I think. Like in that scenario, would it have been more beneficial for him to sit down and just say, hey, do you have ambitions and sort of desires that are beyond what you're necessarily, because that, there's 2 ways to think about it. I mean, the raise might have been appropriate for just what you were necessarily doing at that time, day to day, but you wanted to do more and different and whatever, right? So to your point with the lack of communication, there should have been more of a discussion there of like, hey, how's Eric doing?
Right.
Instead of just, all right, you're in this box, you get this, see you later, on to the next one, right? Is that fair to say?
Right.
Okay.
And I think there was maybe a little more to it than, you're in this box and get out.
Some fluff in there, but
yeah, but I'll tell you, when I was at Iowa State, I was a finance major. My favorite class in retrospect, and the class that taught me the most, was English, and it was writing, and it was business writing.
Hated those classes.
I know, and I hated it too. I'm like, oh, I got to go write business, whatever. But the professor said, in business, you need to take a you attitude in writing a letter or writing a business document. And what she meant by that was, instead of saying, I come up with an example, I love the color blue, it was, blue is a color that you will like the best if you're talking to somebody, right? And putting it so that they view the writing in you attitude. I called it you attitude. I think she probably called it you something as well. Yeah. But that's not just in business. In my opinion, you attitude should be permeating everywhere. Instead of talking about how you as an employee are helping the organization, how is the organization fitting with you as an employee is how a manager should take approach to reviews. And rather than saying, which happens all too often, you're not doing a good job. You're not doing this right. You're not doing that right. If they changed it and said, this job requires this, and I don't think it's what you like to do. So let's find a different way for you in our organization. And maybe there's another role that you can play, instead of saying you suck.
Yeah, Jordan McCann and I, in a podcast that we shot together, the owner of Earl's Tire West, free shout out for him there. He was talking about that. Like, essentially, once you are a business owner and then have employees, I mean, you're no longer the boss almost. Like, there is an element, and I think it gets like sort of tossed around in a cliche way, but there is a reality to the fact that now I have to work harder figuring out how to help this person become the most successful they can be, because then in turn, if they're successful, I'm successful, right? And to your point, it's just a perspective shift then. I mean, And so that in that class that you were in at Iowa State, it just sort of forced you to kind of take that like sidestep approach and think about it from a different angle then? Is that, I mean,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Instead of writing and using, and this goes to public speaking as well, and as being a manager, instead of using the word I need, it's you can provide, and how it impacts the other person that will lift the I up.
Because
As
then you get buy-in, then
Yeah.
it's about them. It's,
Everybody understands where they fit in the organization. And if it's not in the perfect spot when you're hired and there's another spot that you would excel in, the employee would excel in better, that lifts us all up, the better, right? All boats rise with the tide. And if the tide is high, everybody wins. Now, that's not to say that the business owner's not going to win, bigger, but everybody wins. And a good employer, in essence, sees that everybody can make more, and a top side. In my organization, at the brokerage side, not the daycare side, but in my organization, I'd hire people and say, it's not a 40-hour-a-week job. It might be 30 hours. If you can get the job done in 30 hours,
task
that's
oriented.
awesome,
Yeah.
right?
I don't need you just here taking up space. Like, just these are the things we need to get done.
Right. And if in the same regard, there might be weeks where it's going to be 60 hours.
That's 100% how we operate.
Yeah. That's what it is, where a person has autonomy. They know what they have to do, and you let them do it.
There's power in that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
By the way, just a quick note
Yeah.
on that. I said not in my daycare world because the daycare world is very regulated.
It has to be very structured.
Yeah.
And that's interesting to get into because Jordan, my wife, and I, we often get, I'm structured in principle, and there's certain things I think in business, like you need to do things a certain way. But I'm very, very like non-conventional. I don't care how necessarily we get there. I just want to get there. And we leave a lot of it up to our employees. I mean, you create a schedule to me. I mean, Alex, our lead designer one time was like, I'm not a morning person. Like, I would rather work until 6:30 at night some nights. Then nobody's in the office late. I can actually get more done, whatever. It's great. Just you create your own schedule then. I don't care if you leave here every day at 7 o'clock and maybe you don't get in until 9 o'clock. That is fine with me. Now, if there's meetings that need to take place because of other people's schedules or whatever at 8:30 or at 8 o'clock, of course, we're going to expect that of you. But that kind of goes back to that autonomy thing. Like you're a big boy, like you know how to create your own schedule and things we need to get done. But that just comes as normal to me. That's just me sort of being tunnel visioned in these are the things that we need to achieve and get done. And it's like, if we can still do that, then great.
It's the big picture view. Instead of the task view, it's the big picture. We need to get to this. And I don't care if you're doing it at midnight or you're doing it at 7 in the morning or at noon. As long as everybody sees what the big picture is. And the big picture is not you punch a clock at 8 and you punch a clock at 5. Yeah. The big picture is at the end of the day, we got to help people. At the end of the day, we got to help, with our product to help companies. If you're, selling a wholesale thing or whatever, or insurance, at the end of the day, we got to be there for the employees if they end up in the hospital and they need help navigating a healthcare system that's convoluted and, quite frankly, broken.
Yeah, I'm sure you see it through your conversations with different employers. I'm sure you see scenarios that are like perfect examples of that. I'm sure you see scenarios that are potentially broken or there's a large disconnect between employer and employee. But do you sort of find yourself in some cases, like, I don't want to say business coach to like necessarily, but I mean, do you find yourself sort of like mentoring a little bit in some of those instances? Or just like, hey man, if you just kind of took this.
Yeah, I think that there's maybe a lot of that that I don't realize. Yeah. I don't think that I would ever set out to be a mentor. I think that just organically happens naturally, that people start to say, hey, who should we talk to do this? And I understand. I'm not trying to downplay like corporations that say so and so is going to be your mentor, follow them and learn from them. But I think mentoring comes naturally at an elevated position, or maybe it's not even elevated. Maybe it's at a lateral position and they're just really good at it. And this is the person you can learn from. And if you can learn that and you like it, you'll be successful. Right. But again, I think that mentor mentee is a big term and we need that. Certainly we do. For the people that are new in an industry, they need to see and they need to look up to or see how successful people are. And it might be that they want to follow in that footstep, or it might be that I don't want to be that successful. I don't need that mentor. Maybe this mentor on the other side is where more I can be, find my niche or whatever as an employee in this organization.
Yeah, I think that I agree with that. I've never put too much emphasis on having to have like a person that I just like, that's who I really adhere to. Like, that's who I'm going to model sort of my approach of day-to-day business or personal life after. I mean, I sort of believe in like obsessive learning, just always being curious. But it kind of comes back to that fundamental stuff we talked about in the beginning, though. And I remember growing up when people that I was around a lot always, if somebody was super successful, it's like, oh, they fucked somebody over, or they must have done it in a way that like they're no longer a good person. Or it was like you always kind of had to hate the rich guy or like hate the successful person or whatever. And maybe some of them did do things that were not so great. I don't even know. But I sort of just always, if I saw somebody seemingly doing well, I just wanted to know why, and just what was the story behind it. And I think my overall general curiosity is essentially why this podcast started. I mean, having conversations with people, it's exciting to hear. If I know who you are today, I know that there's an entire story behind that's sort of created that person that you now are, right? And so anyway, I suppose for me personally, there would not be one person that I could just put my finger on. It would be a myriad of different things that has led me to like the thought process that I have now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if I look back at my own professional life and even personal life, there are a lot of people along the way who I could say, yeah, that was a mentor of mine. But there was no formal relationship. I watched them and I picked up something that they did and I liked it. I think that's great. Or another person, I mean, your mentors cross you in the aisle at Hy-Vee, or at the grocery store.
If you have the willingness to learn and overall curiosity, that you will be presented with opportunities where somebody can mentor you, but you have to have the willingness to learn.
Yeah. And I'll use an old saying, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, to listen twice as much as we talk. And I think that that's true in the business world and it's true in society today. If we would just listen instead of talking and hear other examples and hear what people are saying to us, we will become better people. And it's not to say that you can't talk, to one another, but truly listen to what somebody is saying before you interject what your opinion is. And maybe you'll pick up one little nugget.
Especially today.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, like the difference between hearing and listening, right? Like, I mean, because you can also participate in a conversation where, we've all done it. We've all been in scenarios where we're essentially just trying to formulate our next thought or sentence. And like you're hearing what the other person's saying, but are you really listening? And are you picking up like what they're trying to tell you and convey to you and reading body like emotions? And that's another reason why I was sort of adamant about even doing this podcast in video too, is there's a certain sincerity I think that you get from somebody when you can see them as well and sort of read their mannerisms. I think it helps you understand or formulate an opinion of a person one way or the other. Yeah. 100%. But I think that overall curiosity again, and I've heard other people talk about it. When somebody has an opposing view, or just thinks differently than you, why do you think, you've seen things sort of shape over the last 30 years and political, business landscape, whatever it may be. Like, in your opinion, when you were growing up in the 80s, was it always, I mean, your parents had opposing views politically. Was it always just immediately jump to you're wrong? I suppose there were cases of that, or do you think that's sort of shifted?
I think it's shifted. In my household, I don't remember my mom and dad ever talking politics. They talked economics and economy because it was a struggle, et cetera. I think today with social media, it's shifted 100%. You can post something on social media and it's almost like keyboard courage. I don't agree with that, so I'm going to reply and send or whatever. And I think that we've got this adversarial relationship in the political realm where maybe we both want the same end result, but we have different ways to get there. If you and I wanted to drive to Minnesota, I could take highways through Iowa, and you could take 235 to 35 or whatever, and head right to Minneapolis. There's different ways to get there. But in today's world, one side says, you can't go that way. And the other side says, you can't go that way. So there's this fight, and it's on social media. It's for everybody to see.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I've often kind of thought about it in a way that politicians have sort of become celebrities in a way that, we sort of over glorify or like put these people up on a pedestal that I'm not sure is even the pedestal that we should be putting them on, right? I mean, they're supposed to basically be a mouthpiece for a group of people, depending on what level of government they are. I mean, if it's your town mayor, right? Like they're supposed to sort of represent the majority within that town. And we put these people sort of up on a pedestal that is like they just are going to just fix everything for us.
Right.
Or
they're not.
Yeah, or if it's bad, it's their fault.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
or they're not.
I mean, I just heard something the other day that Congress has like a 10% approval rating, but a 90% reelection rate, and he essentially was, I believe it was Sean Ryan on his podcast, and he's an ex-Navy SEAL, incredible listen. Guy that's very knowledgeable and does a lot of his own homework. But essentially what he was getting to was be involved. If you're pissed off about what the quote unquote government is doing to you, or putting you into these places that you can no longer be successful, then vote, right? And not only just vote, but just try to inform yourself. And so we talked a little bit earlier about politics getting this kind of EU like tag on it, and everybody just wants to shy away from it, but yet they want to still be sort of combative. I'm not sure where that blend like can be kind of cured,
Well, man, I'll probably open up where I stand politically on this.
Yeah, 100%.
Which is fine because I put myself on the ballot in 2008 for the state of Iowa. But I am a firm believer that the federal government was set up as a minimalist government, and that the 10th Amendment saying states control is accurate. And it's panned out because the federal government can't fix anything. To quote Ronald Reagan, the government is the problem, right? And when people look to the federal government for the solutions.
Johnny Carson, wasn't it, where he had that really good I
think it was.
Yeah, but anyway, sorry.
But yeah, I mean, we continually, and it's certainly true in the healthcare arena, we look to the federal government to fix everything, and they can't fix anything. And that's probably true for almost 100%.
Typically, what the government touches goes to shit.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe they can fix it, but it's going to cost 10 times more than it would be if private industry did it.
And it'll take 10 times as long.
Yes. Yeah. Now, that's not to say that they're not good at some things, but in my opinion, the federal government started taking the world over when they started taxing the population more on their income and overtaking and us sending more and more money to Washington, D.C. and less money to, in our case, Des Moines, to the capital in Des Moines. And if we would reverse that, now I don't think it'll ever be reversed at this point, but if we were to reverse that and the federal government was minimalist and the state governments were stronger, where more money was sent to the state to fix the problems within the state and within the communities within the state, then we would be 10 times better off as a nation. But it's the other way around now. And you get these politicians, and quite frankly, Senator Grassley's been there since the 70s, right? He's been in Washington, D.C., or been involved at the state level in Washington, D.C. And he's a great person. He's knowledgeable. He's powerful. But in Washington, things are set up with seniority. And the longer you're there, the more powerful you become. It's great for Iowa, but in essence, if we could have Washington, D.C. turn over more and have new ideas come in there, then I think this country as a whole would be better. If we stayed,
and to even like to add to that, maybe it's not even new necessarily ideas, but I would use the word current. Like what are the current needs of our population in Iowa, right? Instead of holding on to something that you've been battling with the guy across the aisle from since the 80s.
Right.
You know, yeah.
Well, and you talked about socialism, right? In America, our government doesn't give to charity as much as individuals do, right? Versus other countries that are socialist. They pay higher taxes and then they let the government take care of things, right? Well, in America, geographically, we are so diverse.
Yes.
Economically, we're diverse.
So regionally, we're going to have different thoughts and views and opinions.
Absolutely. You go to California, and they're going to be completely different. They're a maritime state, right? Mm-hmm. Iowa's an agricultural state. And wherever you are in the country, it can be different. And that's what makes America great. But we also self-govern within Iowa or California or wherever. And if you don't like it, you leave. And look what's happening in California right now. Everybody's leaving to go to Texas or Tennessee or whatever because it's a better climate for them there. That's not everybody. I mean, it's still the most populous state, and it's But if we got away from just looking to the east and saying, Washington D.C., can you fix this problem? And we turned it and said, how about let's fix it here locally? What resources can we put together? Where can we put our money at the state level? Well, it's hard because, the state's not going to tax more because everything's still going to Washington, D.C. And now we're 35 trillion and counting in debt at Washington, D.C. That tells you something, right? When I think every state in the country has a balanced budget, guaranteed balanced budget, and you can only spend 99% of your revenues. Okay.
Which is like to the average person, if I gave you $100, you wouldn't be able to spend 120. You only have 100.
Exactly.
Exactly.
That
should be common sense. But
yeah, well, I'll tell you, California is a perfect example. They're a little left leaning politically, or maybe a lot. They wanted to have single payer healthcare, and I'll get back to the healthcare side. So they said, we want to have single payer out here. Now, here's our problem. We have a $250 billion state budget, and healthcare is going to cost us, just healthcare, $500 billion.
Can you be specific? I'm just going to interrupt you. Can you be specific on what you mean by single payer?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Single payer would be like government provided healthcare. And really it's government provided healthcare and financing thereof, right? So insurance is a vehicle to pay for your healthcare needs. Now, what California was saying is we're going to control it all. We're going to tax our people and take the federal money that we can get to cover everybody in the state, and so that when they go to the doctor or the hospital, they don't pay anything. But we're also going to pay the doctor and the hospital. So they control it. That's single payer, single control. Now, again, back to their state budget was $250 million, and healthcare, when they did the analysis, was going to cost them $500 billion. So just to take care of healthcare, it was going to double their budget, And that's before they fixed a road or did anything for the people, social program or whatever. So in order to cover everybody in state-run healthcare, their budget would have had to go from $250 billion to $750 billion. Now, the other side note that California has is that half of their state's budget has to go to education. So
whether it's needed or not,
whether it's needed or not. So if they have $250 billion of revenue or budget, $125 billion has to go to education. Now, let's throw on $500 billion on top of that. Well, that's for the healthcare piece, but another $250 billion has to go to education. So in order to have a single payer in California, they would have had to go to $750 billion and then add $375 billion for education, or another $150 billion for education.
And these are the things that people don't talk about enough or know enough about it, when just the single idea alone of healthcare for all seems like a great thing. Why wouldn't we do it? But there's caveats to this stuff. And one of the things, and I don't mean to interrupt you, because I want to continue down this rabbit hole a little bit, is there's this sort of like sentiment of like, shouldn't you just always do good if you can? And it's like, yes, like there's certain things that like we would all, I mean, for instance, we build homes. Showtime Homes build houses. I wish we could just go to every homeless person downtown Des Moines and say, we're going to build you a house. Like, I wish that were a thing we could do. Financially, you and I both know that would just never work. I would immediately go broke. And then now we can't build houses for anybody because we put ourselves in that hole, right? So instead we have to, as running a for-profit business, like that's the only way. Now we can, as we run a for-profit business, like we just raised $20,000 for Make-A-Wish at an event a couple months ago, we can do those sort of things to give back, right? In ways that is still affordable to us. We're still able to keep operating and make sure that all of our employees are paid so then they can take care of their families, so on and so forth. So it's not, I think it so oftentimes gets confused with like the intent of doing good isn't there just because you say no to this. And it's like, no, it just has to also make sense and be affordable, right?
Right. Well, I think that most people in America, and by most, I mean a vast majority of people in America, care about their neighbor. And want to do right by the communities we live in, the states we live in, and the country as a whole. It's a matter of how do you get there? And again, back to our previous conversation of what is doing right by your neighbor if your neighbor is filled and is happy. Maybe the homeless person is fine having no responsibility and living in a tent. My brother's a perfect example. In 1982, he said, screw it, I'm getting out of here. And he drove to Alaska and homesteaded.
Essentially made himself homeless temporarily for a while.
Yeah. And he didn't have electricity or plumbing since 1982.
Yeah, that's wild.
You know, and he died in 2021. And so you think about that.
He was probably on
time
some
period.
watch list. The government doesn't like when people do that.
I'll tell you, if you ever, and this is not joking about Ted Kaczynski, but if you looked at some of the pictures of Ted Kaczynski, my brother could be Ted Kaczynski. Oh, shit. I mean, he used to wear sunglasses like that,
same
and
room
hoodies,
together?
you know, and whatever. And my brother is extremely intelligent, or he was. I mean, who could go to Alaska and just chop down trees and, you know, do whatever, right? And live their life up there off the land.
Yeah.
But he was happy. And when I would talk to him or see him, he would just say, I don't understand how you can live in the lower 48. This place is crazy. You know, you need to come to Alaska where you're free to do what you want. You know, and you know, that's all relative too, because I had aspirations. I wanted to have, you know, the cars or the house or,
the
you know,
beauty
whatever.
of human beings, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one person's, you know, treasure is another person's junk, or I think the saying goes the other way. One person's junk is another's treasure. My brother up there lived for literally 40 years of his life with no running water or electricity. And was happy as could be, you know, and it's hard to be happy in the winter in Alaska when it's minus 50 degrees.
I've never seen the sun and oof.
But I mean, there is another thing. You look at somebody who's leaning or living in a tent down by the, Des Moines River or whatever, the Raccoon River, and you say, oh, what can I do to help them? Maybe they don't want help. Maybe they don't want you, you know? And there's also people that are sitting on the corners asking you for $1 or $2, and you can give it to them and you can help them. But it's an interesting, and again, back to the political world, how does Washington, D.C. know what the problems are for that individual on the corner or in the tent or my brother in Alaska?
So let's talk about that, because I think the healthcare for all thing, and again, like just coming out of this election cycle, it's relevant. So I want to talk about it a little bit. When you in your role, and can you remind me again? It was the National
Association of Benefits and Insurance Professionals.
Okay, NABIP.
Yeah, NABIP.
And so when you were the president, you certainly had to be in conversations at a Washington D.C. level of. Were you asked, I guess, at that time of your opinions on whether it makes sense to have healthcare for all or private, or,
Oh yeah,
you found yourself in those conversations. What did that look like?
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, Washington D.C. When you talk about healthcare, they don't know anything more than the average American. I've been in offices of Congress where their health person would sit down and we would start talking about deductibles and coinsurance, and they would say, hold on a second, what's a deductible? So they're making healthcare decisions for Americans, and they don't even understand how the financing works and what a deductible is. So, there's something to be said about, again, looking to them for the solutions. Now, that's not even to talk about how much money is being spent in the pharmaceutical area, for one, and who is influencing their decisions there. But at the end of the day, I spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. talking to Congress people, senators, bureaucrats, staffers, a lot. And not only there, but out in California, in Sacramento and in Des Moines and in state capitals across the country.
Did NABIP have a designated lobbyist, so to speak, then? Or
Yeah,
was that essentially you?
So our organization has a federal lobbyist in Washington, D.C., but then our organization was set up where we had a legislative council that would review the bills, and they would look at the bill and say, "Ooh, this is bad."
Hey, Jim, you cannot vote yes for this thing.
Yeah. And we had a grassroots movement across the country. So, for instance, if Senator Grassley, I'll just use Senator Grassley, very powerful on the finance committee, and he's number 2 or so on the HELP committee, Health, Education, Labor, and Pension. If he was running a bill, taking a bill and trying to get it passed, and it was bad for healthcare, our national office would say Grassley needs to be talked to. And that could be in a negative sense towards his bill, or it could be in a positive sense. This is what's great about your bill. This is what's not so great about your bill. And so the grassroots in Iowa would be, spoken to or called or emailed and said, you need to call Grassley's office. You need to email Grassley's office. And quite frankly, when you're talking about legislation at the national level, it's committee work as well. So if the leader, Senator Wyden, is a leader on the finance committee and on the Senate, he's a Democrat out of, I think it's Washington. I'm pretty sure it's Washington State. And it would be enacting an Operation Shout, where our members from across the country, we would write a letter for them, send it to them and say, send it. And it wouldn't necessarily go to Senator Wyden. Certainly the people in Washington it would, but it would be all over the country. And the members of that committee would see what we're saying and say, all right, let's talk about this more. And then they would reach out to our lobbyists and say, what's going on? Or our lobbyists would call me, for instance, when I was the president, and say, can you be in Washington, D.C. next week? Blah, 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 blah. We're going to talk about this, and Senator so-and-so or Congressperson so-and-so wants to talk about this, or the House Ways and Means wants to talk about this issue. And we need somebody there to be kind of an expert in the field. And so then I would go out there, or many of our members would go out there and talk to their Congress people or what have you. Every February, we have what we call Capitol Conference, and we basically descend on Washington, D.C., and we all make appointments with everybody in Congress, and we talk about these issues that they're discussing and saying, these are wrong, or this is an opportunity. Yeah. When I was the president, I said, instead of playing defense, we got to start playing offense. And I said, the last time I checked, a team that shuts the other team out still hasn't won the game until they score something.
Well, and there's something to be said for that anyway. I mean, if you go back to like the Kennedy era and ask not what your government can do for you, or however that quote specifically goes, but like, what can you do? I mean, isn't it sort of always supposed to come from the people anyway? Like the offense, I think fundamentally it's very common for us just to think that offensively it's the government playing that role anyway, when in theory they're supposed to just facilitate. Like we should be the offensive coordinator, the head coach calling the plays, and they should be the one. They should be essentially a quarterback, just carrying it out, right? Like, am I thinking about that wrong?
A secondary role to that. I think that the government's role is to chalk the field, or paint the sidelines and paint the markers, and tell the referees these are the rules. Okay. And then we as Americans, we as business people, are the players. We're the ones really playing each other, and the referees are just keeping us in line with what's good and bad, right and wrong. So that, using the football analogy, we aren't, pushing somebody in the back when, they can't see us, right, or stabbing them, right, or whatever. So I think the American, idea is everybody's playing on the same field, and we set the rules like this,
yeah,
and you play, and you try and get it down to the other end, or they try and stop you and do something different, right? That's kind of an adversarial, you win, I lose, I win, you lose, but it's more of an analogy of how our country works, right? Walmart and Amazon are probably the fiercest of competitors, right? And Walmart used to be powerful, and Amazon took them over.
In the book Simon Sinek wrote, Start With Why. I'm pretty sure it's that book. It was a Simon Sinek book for sure. I know, really good author. But he talks about worthy rivals, and you sort of have to have that competition in private sector business. Obviously, the Microsoft Apple analogy, and to your point, like Walmart and Amazon. I mean, you sort of have to have those to create that uptick in anything.
Right. Well, and you look at it and you say Amazon obviously is where it's at, right? But Walmart's still around. They've overcome, they've adopted. Maybe they weren't growing as fast anymore.
He actually talks about Walmart specifically in that book, I think.
Yeah, but they've changed their way. Now they've got a mail order and, whatever. Same thing with Home Depot and Lowe's and Menards and whatever. And it's the same way in Main Street America. Somebody wants to sell clothes, like my dad, and he's going up against the Joseph A. Banks or whatever, the major players. And there's a niche and there's a spot for all of us to do that, right? And I believe when I look at some of these big firms that used to be small firms and they used to be family driven, sometimes they fail when they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah. And they're not as good, and there's more strife within their employee
whatever
workforce.
It was that potentially made them successful, potentially gets lost in that.
And what is that?
Yeah,
that's the key.
Yeah,
and I think it's because family-owned businesses are typically, I care about you, my employee, and you care about the goal of our organization. We care together to be successful. And when you get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, that relationship goes away.
It does. You're right. All right. Well, I think I really want to I want to continue to go down this road of essentially again, with it be like coming out of this last election cycle, and I'm at that age where I feel like you get into your mid-30s and you really just have this like additional thirst. I sort of have just come into this like I want to know more about everything, you know.
Yeah.
But when
So do I in my mid 50s.
yeah, well, I mean, I hope like I think if you're successful to any degree, like we talked about, that you're just always curious and wanting to learn. But are there examples of, so a lot of times like we can learn from history, right? And so when you're having these discussions about privatized healthcare versus healthcare for all and government funded, I mean, certainly we look elsewhere in the world for examples of this, right? And oftentimes Europe gets mentioned in the healthcare world and blah, blah, blah. So just, can you speak to those examples of like maybe cases that you guys looked at as like, look how this failed, or like what they did, or are there any examples of that conversation?
Man.
I mean, like Canada, for instance, you know, that gets brought up a lot.
So let's start with some generalities.
Okay.
85% of our population is healthy. 15% is not healthy.
And by healthy and not healthy, I'm assuming we're talking
Heavy
about like
users of healthcare.
Yes. Okay.
Right. I'm a heavy user of healthcare because I'm diabetic, you know, and I have to have insulin, and I have to go to the doctor to make sure that my bloods are, you know, in the screenings are in the right, whatever.
Yeah.
A cancer patient, a heart patient.
I have ulcerative colitis, so I get a $12,000 shot every 8 weeks or whatever.
Right.
But, yeah.
Right. So when you look at that and you compare, now that's pretty much worldwide. So when you look at a single payer system like Canada or European countries or what have you, you can look at them and say 85% of your population is going to think your system's great because I don't have to pay anything when I go, right? But the 15% that have to use it a lot don't want to have coverage in their place because they might have lines months long. You might not be able to go to a doctor for months in Canada if you have cancer. I use an example that in America, if you went to an oncologist, you went to your doctor and they said, we're going to do an x-ray and we're going to do an MRI or what have you and see this, and then we think it might be cancer. Okay. You're going to get that done the next day in America, maybe a couple days, whatever. Then if they determine that it is cancerous, you're going to see an oncologist, boom, like that, right? Within a few days again. In Canada, you might not be diagnosed for weeks and weeks or months because they, what we call ration care. And they're not rationing care per se, but they have a federal budget that says, this is how many MRIs you can have this month. This is how many, you know, surgeries you can do this month. And the reason that you can only do that is because the federal government sets the budget and says, this is all we're going to pay you, right? So there are situations where a Canadian might die of cancer before they're even diagnosed. Whereas in America, they say, well, the morbidity rates, you know, people are getting cancer left and right here. Well, it's because we're diagnosing it within a couple days and you're getting treated within a couple weeks. Whereas in Canada, they might not be getting treated, right? So, and that's kind of socialistic thought all over. We're going to tax everybody for the healthcare, and then we've got X amount of dollars for the healthcare, so that's all we can spend. Mr. or Mrs. Doctor, Mr. or Mrs. Pharmacist, Mr. and Mrs. and Mr. Hospital owner, whatever. This is all you're going to get.
And it sort of, I mean, along those lines then, and I'm just asking again because I'm curious. I mean, like, doesn't it certainly decentivize people to want to get into those fields then too, if they sort of are just capped at like whatever they can make then?
Yeah. Think of it in America. If we went to, even with a free market, right? But we said in healthcare alone, it's going to be government controlled, Medicare for all. Okay. And you're in med school and you want to graduate from med school, do all your residencies or whatever, but ultimately you want to go back to Des Moines, Iowa and be a doctor or whatever. And we have Medicare for all, whereas the government says, you know what, in Des Moines, we got plenty of doctors. We don't want you to go to Des Moines. We want you to go to Hoboken, New York, or we want you to go to, rural West Texas.
You no
and be a
longer have the
doctor there.
autonomy to just say, no, but I'm the best that there could be in Des Moines, and I want to prove that.
Right.
You don't get that opportunity.
Right. So when you work for the government tells you where you're going to go. That's on the healthcare side. On the financial side of it, how is the government going to pay that doctor in West Texas or the doctor in rural Iowa? They might say, well, rural Iowa can't be that expensive versus New York City. So we're going to send more money to New York City for healthcare than we are to rural Creston, Iowa.
And we already know based on previous conversation that a lot of these people don't even know what deductibles are, let alone how much somebody should make.
Right, right. So when we talk about government control of healthcare in America, I think it's catastrophic. I honestly think that it is 100% wrong. Now, that's the American ideology in me coming out. Is our healthcare system good the way it is? Absolutely not. You look around the country or around the world, you have socialized medicine in Canada, and then insurance comes in to supplement what the government doesn't pay for, right? So there's a little private market, but not a big private market. In America, the government got into Medicare in the 1950s and 60s when it was officially done. And we ended up with a dichotomy in our healthcare system, whereas the government took care of seniors, but the private sector took care of the under 65 people in the population. So now the government is controlling pricing, and a doctor or a hospital or whatever is being told by the federal government, on these people, you're going to get paid this amount. And the private sector has to come in behind that and negotiate with a hospital system or a doctor or a pharmacist or a pharmacy manufacturer or whatever. And so if you're getting cut on the government side as a doctor, what are you going to ask for the private side to do? Pay more because the government's paying me less. And in our system, we have a two-factor system that doesn't necessarily work together. And that's why it's so bad in America. And the other side of that is in foreign countries where it's government controlled, they tell a pharmacy manufacturer, this is how much money you can charge for that drug in our country. And what do they say? Okay, we'll provide you with the necessary, amount of medication. Because in America, there's no price control. They can charge whatever they want. Now there is price control a little bit on the Inflation Reduction Act and the whatever, and what Biden did on 10 drugs in the Medicare market. Well, what happens on the private market? Now those drugs are going to be more expensive.
If you have a senior on Medicare that is receiving insulin or whatever, certainly the dollars might be capped. And you see a lot of those commercials even in this last election. It's like my insulin costs. And so, all they're going to do is these people aren't just going to say, okay, I'll just make less money. They're going to make it up somewhere.
And the interesting thing is it's like a balloon, right? If you squeeze a balloon down here, the air pushes up. If you squeeze it up here, the air pushes down. So that's our healthcare system in a balloon, right? We haven't let the air out of the balloon. What we're doing is we're just moving it around by squeezing here and there. And if you think of our healthcare system in America as a big balloon, the government is squeezing, but the air comes out on the private sector side. So it's broken. When you see these commercials that, Biden and the Democrats got $35 insulin, yeah, that's $35 to the person, but on the backside, somebody else is paying for it, right? The employer through an insurance premium, or the insurance company is paying that. And if that insulin is $100 and the patient is paying $35, then the insurance company pays $65. If the patient normally would spend $50 for that, the insurance would pay $50.
And the way that insurance carriers pay for things is through premiums, which essentially costs employers and private,
Right. And so everyone thinks that insurance companies are bad. And I'm not necessarily saying that they're great, because they still, they still stop people from having, prior authorized services, say, you don't need that drug, you need this drug, or what have you.
We generalize too much in society in general. It's like an oxymoron. But I mean, because all home builders are sleazy people, all realtors suck. All government, no, not all government officials are terrible people. Not all insurance sucks, and not all pharma is big pharma that is robbing people either. I mean, some pharmaceutical companies, so I agree with that. I mean, it's just, there's a place for everybody, right? We just need people to follow a little bit better channels sometimes.
Well, and understand how the flow of money goes.
Correct.
And it's the most convoluted system that, in my opinion, needs major overhauls. Back to when I was the president, I said, we've got to put points on the board. Instead of being against everything, which is actually saying we're for the status quo, and we already know the status quo is broken, then let's come up with the solutions to this system. Again, one of my things is, why do insurance companies have prior authorization? Certainly some things need to be prior authorized, like, should you be on this weight loss drug if you're going to continually go to McDonald's and eat, Big Macs or whatever?
I could talk about that one a lot. Yeah. So if we want to, we certainly can. I mean, to that point specifically, while we're there, do you think that this current administration, and if RFK certainly gets his way of wanting to get after some
America
people,
healthy again.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that? What's your take on that? I mean, I'm sure there's mixed feelings here and there.
Yeah.
But I mean, to that point though, just with what you said about that whole, if you don't change your daily habits, and I'd actually just shot a podcast last week with somebody that works in functional medicine and stuff. And there are a lot of Western medicine doctors that you go to that just throw you on a drug without even asking you about your lifestyle and whatever. So it's interesting to
Why?
me. Yeah. I mean,
back to Simon Sinek, the greatest word in our language is why. The greatest question that we should be asking about everything is why. So when you look at our system, again, it's Western medicine, right? There are things, they're talking about narcotics now being a way to help with mental illness. Hallucinogens.
Yeah, Rogan was talking about that with JD Vance.
Yeah. And they're looking at it seriously in California as a covered deal. 20 years ago, you would never have had that discussion. But that's somebody saying, why are these so bad? Why can't we use these things? Now, I'm not suggesting by any means that we ought to legalize it and let everybody in the world just have access to narcotics.
Let's explore something that has proven that it won't kill you.
Yeah.
So because some of these other drugs that people are taking for these same causes can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll use chiropractic as an example. I'm a firm believer in chiropractic. I've seen benefits for myself using a chiropractor, but insurance doesn't cover it because they don't want to see an individual go to the chiropractor once every week for years on end or whatever.
Is that specifically if you're going there for preventative maintenance, I will call it, I don't think that's probably the correct term, versus an acute injury or right?
Well, but even under an acute injury, the traditional Western approach, and chiropractor's Western, but the traditional approach would be, you have a knee surgery, you broke your leg, your arm, whatever. We're going to take care of it. And then you're going to go to physical therapy for 6 times, and then you're going to be on your own. Well, what happens if you need 10 times of physical therapy? And you got an insurance company that's going through the books trying to say, okay, what is the standard is only 6. You don't need 2 more visits. Yeah. So now the person has used their 6 visits and they're sitting there going, I need 2 more. And you got to go through this prior authorization process where the physical therapist sends tons of information to the insurance company, or the surgeon sends tons of information to the insurance company, and the insurance company says, denied. send it back. And then the doctor says, well, it's been denied. Well, why? Well, because the insurance company isn't going to pay for it. Okay. So can I just pay for it? Well, you can, but if you've got insurance, we don't want you to do that. Let me see if I can appeal it. So then you appeal it to the insurance company, and maybe you talk to a medical director who's a physician, and the surgeon talks to the medical director who's a physician, and they're on the same wavelength. Right? They've gone through schooling, they understand it, and then it gets approved. But the employee who might not be a doctor just is going through the book, and I'm downplaying their role, and they're not stupid. I don't mean that, because they're probably nurses or whatever. But at the end of the day, they're going through the manuals that the insurance company has and saying no or yes. Now, I'm rehabbing my arm or my leg, and I've run my course, but I can't go back to the doctor until I get this prior approved. So maybe I go 3 weeks where I didn't need to. And that's a problem in our system. Chiropractors aren't even looked at as preventive medicine. They're looked at as, and our system in general is to say, how do we get this sick person back to normal?
There really isn't much, and maybe, I mean, this has come up in your conversations, but not much is incentivized to to maintain health, period. Is there much incentive to maintain or create good health? I mean, it's almost all reactive, and I think that has certainly a place. And you see employers that maybe incentivize employees if they get a certain amount of steps in per day and can log it on their watches, so on and so forth, things like that. We're rewarding people for trying to be healthier. But I think that is it's interesting, and I don't necessarily have a solution for it, but there isn't much incentive to stay healthy.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the individual. If my employer says, we're going to give you $5 or $20, or we're going to reduce your premium by the government allotted amount that you can reduce it without being discriminatory towards somebody who can't exercise, we're going to do that. At the end of the day, I'm going to look at it and go, is it worth it for me? I feel healthy. I might be a few pounds overweight, but I feel good. So I'm not going to do all that walking and, whatever. But you, on the other hand, might say, oh man, I don't care about the money, but I'm going to be as fit as I can be. And the next person in line says, I could use that money, and, I could probably get off the chair a little bit and walk around, so I'll do it. But it's an individual choice on whether you want to be healthy. And again, back to the concept of 85% of the people in our country are healthy and 15% are not. What are you doing? The people who are healthy are going to be saying, yeah, now I get a financial benefit to be healthy. So now I got my gym membership covered or partly covered or whatever. And I get time away at lunch where I can walk or I can work out. Now my employer has a fitness center, all of that stuff. Now, from an employer standpoint, think of it in this term. What is my employee turnover? Right. So if you're in a high turnover business, do you want to invest a whole bunch of money in the health of your employees when you know that you've got 1 year or 2 years with that employee before they're going to leave you? And
just because of the nature of the position, it might be just a entry level. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So how much do I want to invest of our overhead or what's left over in a fitness plan for all employees? Or would it be better where I don't know if it's going to lower my insurance premiums or not? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Certainly if you went to an extreme level on that, where you could really impact the people and get them healthy and force them to be healthy, you could see some impact.
It would be hard to just blanket, yeah.
Yeah, but if it's just a small little fraction of how to put in a wellness program, and I know it's not going to impact my 2-year turnover rates, then why am I investing tens of thousands of dollars in this when I get no benefit out of it, other than while they're there 2 years, maybe they're better. Or if I know that after my turnover rate's not going to be 2 years, it's going to be 5 years. Yeah. Now there's some different. Now we're talking, right? Yeah. Now we're talking of a return.
That's definitely interesting. Back to we know that this administration is going to seek out, and back to the playing offense thing a little bit, going to seek out things that just are no longer working, or programs that have been put in place for years and years and years that are sitting there, and people are just sort of going through the motions, but it's not really creating much good. Do you think there's going to be a direct impact, like in your world or with employer-based healthcare and just like that?
And
whole
what
thing?
you're talking about is with Trump coming back in, you mean?
Yeah, with Trump coming back
Yeah.
in, the rumors, we still don't know if Elon's going to directly be involved or not, but nonetheless, with
JFK.
yeah, exactly,
RFK.
RFK Jr. And I mean, with his approach to things, and I mean, there's a lot of ties there, especially with pharmaceuticals and people that literally leave the FDA and go directly work for these companies at high levels. It's like, hey, we're not fucking dumb here. Like like there's people that do a little bit of homework that can see this stuff. Right. Like I wonder, I think with change, there's always going to be sort of like some negative side effects too initially, but in order for long-term growth, you sort of have to like take a step back, potentially take 2 steps forward. Right.
Yeah. Listen,
There's a
our
lot to
government
unpack, but-
is set up for a reason the way it is.
Yeah.
Executive, judicial,
Right.
and Congress or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. The House. Yeah.
Yeah, legislative. And in my opinion, when Obama had a complete Democrat control, they passed Obamacare. Some good things in Obamacare, a lot of bad. And most of the bad is not dealing with healthcare. It's about the bureaucracy of it, right? There's some good things in there. No pre-X. No, you can guaranteed renewable. You can get in if you don't have insurance. Most people don't realize that during the Clinton administration in the 90s, we got rid of pre-X. But all of the difference is in the 90s, the pre-X said, if you go more than 63 days without insurance, then you have to go through underwriting to get back in. Obamacare changed that to say it doesn't matter if you go out, you can come back in annually, once a year, which happens to be right now for a January effective date. So now saying that, that's a good thing, I think, so that people like in my situation, or if you're diagnosed with cancer, you know that you've got an ability to get that taken care of and you're not going to go bankrupt. But most people also don't know that in the current system with insurance, the biggest reason for personal bankruptcy is healthcare expense. It's not house payments. It's not credit card debt, although there is a lot of that. The biggest thing is healthcare.
I did not know that.
Yeah. It's healthcare debt because they might go to the hospital and it's a $200,000 hospital bill that a hospital is saying, you owe us. And they're going bankrupt because they can't pay it. I'll send you some of the statistics, but it's alarming that over 100 million people in America, and that's a number, a third of our population is worried about healthcare debt or not going to the doctor when they need to because of the price of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those people that, I just had a rib pop out a week and a half ago randomly, and it was one of those, like, I'll just tough it out for a few days. It got worse, obviously didn't get any better on its own. And the chiropractor was like, dude, if you'd have just came in like, a couple days later, it would have been fine. But I think that is a real thing, because man, I walk through those doors and I just know it's going to be thousands. Like, I don't know. I have no idea. I have no perception of reality of what things even cost inside those doors. I just know once I get inside that hospital, it's going to be expensive.
Yeah. Average hospital bill charge in central Iowa, $25,000. Wow. So if you're going to go inpatient in a hospital, it's going to be $25,000 on average. Average doctor visit, if it's a general doctor, it's going to be a little less than $200 for that visit. If you go to a specialist, it's going to be more than $400 for that doctor visit. If you fill a brand name medication, so you go to the doctor gives you a script, you go to the pharmacy to get that brand name medication, average cost $500 for a 30-day supply of a brand name medication. Now, do you pay it? No. The insurance company's picking up a huge piece of that, and that's why your premiums are so high.
My Stellara, for instance.
Yeah, I don't know what Stellara's cost is, but you might pay $30 for that as a copay, and the insurance company might be paying, $1,000.
My copay is like $2,900, and then there's a copay assistance program that comes in 2 steps that copay, because I got hung up like 4 months ago. I got hung up with, so I needed lab work done, so they couldn't get the pre-auth for my medication. But mine is if it lapses, it's like I'm gonna have a colostomy bag, and it's like I have to have it once my body basically becomes immune to it. It's say goodnight. The drug no longer works. It creates antibodies to it, and you got to come up with a different method. So it was just, I was like, well, I need it, and they're like, well, it's gonna cost. I was like, I don't care. I have to have. So like, charge my credit card $3,000. I'll figure out everything later. And just sort of had to eat it because I was caught in the mess, and now I'm educated on it. I know how the copay assistance program works and how to prepare all that.
You know who does the copay assistance? The drug manufacturer. So a drug manufacturer says our drug is $250, whatever. I'm just making numbers up now, but let's say it's $250, and it only costs us $15 to manufacture it. But instead of charging $250, let's charge $1,500 for that drug. It's arbitrary, right? The story of the guy who bought the cancer drug company and then immediately jacked up the price, right? Price gouging, right? But let's just go with this example and say it's $1,500 and it could be $250 or $500. Now they're saying the insurance company has caught on and said, man, we're not going to pay the difference between what should have been a $200 cost to us and is now, $1,000 or more dollar cost to us. So we're not going to cover it. Or if the employee wants it, it's going to go to their deductible. And now you're going to pay $1,900 or $1,500 in my example for that drug. Now the manufacturer says, wow, that drug only costs us $1,500 or $15 to make. So how can we get this so that the person who needs the drug,
be kidding me,
who needs the drug, can get it, and we'll still make $500.
They're still
from
making what the
company.
insurance company is willing to pay.
Yeah. So the insurance company maybe first said, okay, we get it. It was $250, but now we'll give you $500 for it. Okay. So, maybe the insurance company pays them $450. So now they say, we're still making more money on that drug, but we still have to get that patient to get the drug. And if it's too much and they're going to have to pay too much, then how do we make that drug less costly? I got an idea. Let's not make it $1,500. Let's make it $2,000. And then we'll give the patient copay assistance and bring that cost down to the patient so they still buy it from us. So we have a system where the price is here, they jack up the price, the insurance company says, no, we're not going to go down to the same price, we're going to give you a little bit more. And then they say, well, how do we get it? Because nobody's going to want to buy it. So let's give them assistance, call it copay assistance, and we're going to jack the price up even a little bit more. And then maybe the insurance company will give us a little bit more, and we'll make copay assistance so that the patient still gets our drug. And we make more money.
So why isn't there the ability for so typically in a given market, right, there could be a competitor that comes along and develops, like in my case, Stelara. Like there could be a different injection that only costs then $300. They're still crushing it. Like why isn't there more competition in that market?
Yeah, great question. And you hear the federal government talking a lot about it. It's patent protected. Right? So patents last 17 years. And of that 17-year period, there's a long time where they file the patent, but then they got to go through FDA approval. And so let's say that cost is 10 years, whatever. Now they've got 7 years left on their patent to make all the money back before some generic company comes in and starts to copy it, right? Yeah. So they charge a lot of money to regain all of their R&D. Now, most people don't know this, and they hear that example or that argument from the drug manufacturer. But if you looked at their P&L statement, profit and loss statement quarterly, most of them are for profit. You look at their P&Ls and you look at advertising expense and R&D expense, and they're right there together. Actually, marketing is probably more expensive than R&D in many cases.
Are they marketing to the general public, or are they marketing to the physicians that are,
physicians, all of it, all of the above. I mean, what's interesting about our system is I can't get a drug without a doctor's prescription, yet many, many times I'll be watching TV and I'll see two people sitting in a bathtub on a cliff overlooking a beautiful sunset. And it's Cialis or whatever it is, you know?
Yeah, and we're like
you
only
sit
one
there
of
and go,
2 countries or something that allows pharma
direct to the public advertising that is advertising something that they can't buy without a doctor intervening. Now, I've talked to Congress about that as well, and they said if you did away with the advertising money, the down tail to that would be the TV companies would all struggle with.
But that's the point, though. The argument that a lot of these people make, though, is like, because to your point, essentially that advertising is useless. It's to a market that can't even directly buy from them. But the reason why a lot of people say that it's still supported is because then those same, especially like, say you're watching CNN, say you're watching Fox News, the same people that are then profiting from that advertisement are the people that are going to turn around and give those people good pub back. So like, I mean, that's not to get too conspiracy theory based, but I mean, that does make sense if you look at it just purely financially.
Yeah. No, here's the other thing. Let's just think of a world where there's no advertising of medications, right? And you had arthritis of your knees really bad, really, really bad, right? And you went to your doctor and the doctor said, take this drug. This will help you. What are you going to do? You're going to take the drug, right? So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and say, what do you call a med student that graduates top of their class? And what do you call a med student that graduates 99th out of 100 in their med class? You call them both the same thing, doctor, right? Obviously, I want to go to the doctor that graduated top of the class. In whatever reason. If I'm going to have brain surgery, do I want to go to the guy or gal who graduated 99th out of 100 in brain surgery school? Or do I want to go to the top of the class? I want to go to the top of the class, right? But you don't know that. And so you go to your doctor and the doctor says, take this medication, you'll be fine. You take the medication and be fine. But if you went to a different doctor who maybe graduated top of their class and maybe knows the cutting edge that, this drug is better, you go to that doctor and you're going to get a different drug. And I'm not trying to throw doctors under the bus because they're great and they go through a lot of schooling, right? But it's the same thing with anything. If you're building homes and there's another person building the home and they're using, imported 2x4s from China and you're using the stuff that's made here from redwoods in California or whatever, I get what I get. I don't know that.
Yeah, you're sort of just trusting the expert.
Yeah, you're trusting the person that you're entrusting with.
Yeah.
And healthcare is no different. So from a transparency standpoint and the Google world, I agree with it. I think it's fascinating that I can look up and say, my doctor said this.
And it does always say, like, ask your doctor about, right? And so, I mean, it is interesting that I guess you could present to your doctor, like, what about this, or like other alternatives.
And I'll tell you, I've said this in a lot of speeches across the country. When we talk about the future of healthcare, I throw out this example. And I read it in the Wall Street Journal a few months back. And it basically said that mirrors are in development in Silicon Valley and in China, where if you look into the mirror can diagnose your facial expressions, and it will talk to you and it will say, Eric, you seem depressed today. And it will give you ideas to cheer your emotion up, right? To make you happier, it'll give you ideas. Or it might say, Eric, you seem, inordinately happy today. Have a great day. And it builds you up again. That's just a mirror. The mirrors are doing this now. Yeah. You maybe know that in the health or in the home building.
I'm not actually aware of that specifically, but
yeah, it's in development now. Here's another one. Toilet seats and toilets are now able to, they're perfecting it, but you'll be able to go to the bathroom and diagnose whether you have a urine problem or a urinalysis, or it might be that it's detecting that your blood sugars in your urine is high and you might be pre-diabetic. Or think of the other way, you're going to the bathroom and it's analyzing your colon and giving you a colonoscopy. No doctor intervention, but technology is there. And with the internet and technology combined, doctors won't be practicing medicine very much longer. They will be either experts and know everything, or they will be a dinosaur.
And I think with this functional medicine stuff, like more holistic ways to heal and get healthy, and to your point, like and instead of like actually diagnosing diets and what leads to different things. And we know now that there's stuff in our foods that are like cereals that our kids are eating that lead to cancer and just all this stuff, right? I think, I do think that this is sort of the age of like that stuff is going to change for sure.
Yeah. Well,
because the information is just out there too much now.
This article only talked about two things, mirrors and toilet seats, right?
Right.
But now think about a refrigerator and the stuff that you buy. Cameras you can take a picture of something and it'll find a price, on the internet where it might be cheaper or not. So imagine a refrigerator where you buy some vegetables and put it in there and it analyzes the vegetables, or not just vegetables, but everything in your refrigerator. And then you take it out and, you cut off the piece that you're going to eat or the part that you're going to eat and put it back in. And the refrigerator now knows that you just took, 1.5 pounds of that red meat. Right. And the refrigerator might say, hey, Eric, you should only eat 8 ounces, not 24 or whatever. Again, I'm looking and thinking and talking about way in the future, right? The George Jetson stuff that is not going to be far away.
Sometimes you have to look so far beyond what is comprehensively like possible now, though, to like sort of hit even what might be more short-sighted. I mean, if you only try to think 5 years in advance, it's like, oh, well, that shit's already in process. Sometimes
right.
You do have to think out that far.
Did you see Elon Musk's rocket?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
the booster.
The one that got caught.
No, this is one that just recently shot up, and the booster that got it up there, then when it disengaged or whatever, they controlled the booster.
Yeah, and it came down and
brought it all the way back down and reloaded it on the landing.
I think that was it was well timed too, leading up right before the election. It was like, fuck. I mean, this guy's like, how can you argue that? And I mean, obviously, he's probably got just incredible teams all over the place. But I mean, the fact that a booster got caught by 2 arms, that just like that's insane. Yeah, it was. It was incredible.
And that's just one example. If we can do that with a rocket booster, what else could we do in the healthcare field? I mean, it's unbelievable.
If you were to
the opportunity,
if you were to sit in Washington D.C. right now, and like in your role, obviously in your profession, and given the fact that you were the president of NABIP, like what would be your first number one, like this is what we need to like start at least looking into, just the number one priority in your mind to bring somewhat of controlled chaos to it?
Yeah. We've got to take the money out of healthcare. And when I say money, it's excessive money, right? And where I would start is one, it's a big issue, right? Health of the individuals in America, obesity is a big deal, and how you control the individual is very difficult. But if we looked at one segment within the insurance world right now, it would be pharmaceuticals, because there is a pill that will be developed to cure cancer and to cure diabetes and to cure these catastrophic chronic conditions. Absolutely. Within, I think, the next 10 years, diabetes will be resolved. It'll be cured. I think cancer will be cured. The problem that we're going to have is, will big pharma or will the big system, healthcare system, let it happen? Because think about all the drug manufacturers that make insulin, all the needles that, diabetics have to use, and I'm using diabetes as an example. Think about the outpatient facilities that cancer patients have to go to get chemo or radiation at the inpatient center or what have you. If we cure diabetes or cancer or heart problems, they go away. And there is a big, big economy there, right? Big. And so what are they going to do? They're going to fight back, and they're going to say, it's not proven. It's not proven. The FDA is going to be involved. And there's 18% of our GDP trending to 20 is involved in healthcare, in the healthcare space. So 1 out of every $5 in America has a touch on healthcare in our country. So saying that, how do we get that paid for? How do we change the system so we don't have a manufacturer who is selling it to a reseller, who's selling it to the pharmacy, and a PBM, a pharmacy benefit manager, who is in negotiation with the manufacturer on how much the cost should be? And there's two different systems there. And the PBM not only negotiates rebates from the manufacturer, but also negotiates with the insurance side on what they will pay for a drug. And then the insurance company then knows what the cost of that drug is going to be, but then they also manage the pharmacy who is charging what they can get paid. There's too much
vertical integration there. I mean, and that's what I think is bewildering to me, is the fact that every other market in this country essentially is established based off of competition. And for instance, there's no such thing in my world as price gouging. I can't just go charge somebody $3 million for a house that is only a $1 million house. The market won't allow me to do it because of competition. And it's so wild to me that to just say that there has to be corruption at some level. And I'm not trying to jump on like the full blown conspiracy train, but it's just the only sector that really we talk about price gouging to the level, especially in your example earlier, that we talk about it too. So I hope that you're right. I mean, that part does need to be addressed big time. And how do we not, like, you can't just constrict people to where they can't make any more money and just completely, again, socialize essentially medicine, but there has to be a like, holy shit moment there.
Yeah. When you think about in the healthcare space, and in any space, think of healthcare and TV purchasing. Flat screens used to be, 4 inches flat. Right? And now they're like, an inch flat or an inch and a half flat or whatever. They used to be plasma. And all the time, the price was expensive, and it's always come down to now you can go to
innovation always leads to exactly.
Yeah. And when more people can do it, it drives the price down. In the healthcare space, it's the opposite. It's, hey, let us conglomerate. Let us buy this organization because our efficiencies will drive the price of healthcare down. But I would challenge anybody in the country to show me where prices have come down because they've joined forces with another organization. Yeah. When you look at Iowa specifically,
and at least like relative to inflation, like, things can go up a little bit, but yeah, to your point, I would be hard pressed to find one.
When you look at Iowa and you say, there's 2 systems in Iowa, you got Mercy One and Unity Point. And it's like that across the country. But in many cases, there's literally only a couple systems, hospital systems, doctor systems. The hospitals buy the doctors, they buy the outpatient MRI facilities, et cetera, et cetera. And when there's only 2 major players that are providing care, that restricts competition, that drives price up. Everybody wants a monopoly, right? You want to be the only one that can build houses because now you can charge more money for it, right? In the same regard, on the insurance company side, in most markets in the country, you've got 2 or 3, 4 maybe, if you're lucky, insurance companies that are now paying 1 or 2 or 3 hospital systems, and they're controlling everything. They're controlling the access to care, and they're controlling the financial payment of care. And if those two were to be analyzed and look at the publicly traded ones, look at where their price goes.
It's like a gasoline manufacturer controlling the automobile industry in a way that you could only use their gasoline. Like,
Yeah.
it's Standard Oil all over again.
Yeah.
You know, it's
or if Elon Musk made a special electric plug for his
electricity
cars.
or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Or even to the extent that it's only this type of electricity, right? I mean, every business owner that came up with that idea would love it, but you've got to have innovation. You've got to have somebody that can compete with you. And in the drug space, that kind of back to your original case, after 17 years, you'll have a lot of generic people coming in. But what happens then? The generic drug comes in at a lower price, but then when they get market share, they get market-driven supply and demand, their price goes up. And so the brand name comes down, but the generic price goes up. So we still have an inflationary factor in pharmacy. And another one that you hear is, let's just import drugs from Canada. Well, the drug companies know how much they're sending to Canada. So if we just massively in America, 330 some million people just started importing drugs from Canada, Canada's going to say absolutely not, and they're going to stop their pharmacies from exporting because it's not taking care of their population. But the other side of that is the manufacturer of the drug is going to say, you're sending everything back to America, and we're already providing for America, so we're going to stop our supply to you as well. So there's two things happening in that. Now, is that wrong to import from Canada? Absolutely not. I think it's a better solution, and I've actually helped people import from Canada. And I have a very good friend in Florida who has a company that does it for people, and he does yeoman's work. But he sees how corrupt and bad our system is on the pharmacy side. Corrupt is maybe a bad word, but
yeah,
I mean,
again, I think there does have to be. Corrupt is just relative, because it's like when you use the word corrupt, I mean, your mind typically goes to just like the worst of the worst. But I mean, I think corruption can be at a like smaller level as well. I mean, I think in some way, shape, or form, it is corrupt. I think it's okay to say that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's unfortunate because our healthcare system is like that. It used to be that a doctor would go to the house and you call them and say, "Oh, my kid's sick," or I'm sick. The doctor would come to the house and hear your heart, whatever, and maybe not the best healthcare, because this is ages ago, and the technology is advanced, and we can do a lot more now, and we will in the future. But it was focused on the patient in the old days, and now it's focused on the profit and focused on the money before it's focused on the patient. And I'm sure that there's doctors that would argue that fact with me, and that's fine. But I would ask them to open up their tax return.
The system at least is, for sure.
Absolutely.
I mean, the doctor themselves that might argue it certainly could have good intent, like as a person or whatever, in practicing the medicine that they do. But I think it would be fair to say that the system they operate in is definitely centered around the financials. Yeah,
it's flawed, and even the best intentions, there's also a secondary point to that too. That at some point they could give the care free. If a person came in and couldn't afford it, they could certainly afford to give them free care, and many do. But at some point,
at least negotiate bills or whatever. Yeah,
right. But at some point, you can't just give away to the homeless a house, and you can't just give away health care at your own personal loss.
Yeah, my mother-in-law works in the business office for a hospital, and I mean, practically runs the place, honestly. But I mean, just hearing some of obviously she can't share like specifics in certain scenarios, but just the constant juggle of that, of like this person just, potentially not being able to even pay that bill, and then what do you do, and write it off, and all that stuff. It is wild, because you're talking about inflated amounts of money. So all of a sudden, when the carrier doesn't step in and pay it, it's like, well, shit, if we would have just charged $100 for that, like it actually costs, we wouldn't really be in this boat. But we said we were going to charge $10,000 because we thought the carrier was going to pay for it. I mean, you see it in the construction game, even with roofing and all sorts of things. But
I'll give you a great example. My firstborn, my wife, we had an individual policy at the time that only covered maternity if it was not normal. So regular, vaginal delivery of a child, not covered. But C-section was, or if there was an emergency or whatever during delivery. So I got a bill from...
What time frame was this? Like what year was this?
This is 2007.
Okay.
And so I get a bill, and it's, I want to say it was somewhere around $8,000. And I called the hospital. I won't name their name, but I called them and said, I can't pay that, $8,000. Let's figure out a better price. And they said, well, it's not covered by insurance, but we see that you have insurance, so we'll give you the discounted rate of that insurance company had it been covered, which was nice. It was great for the hospital to do that. So it went from like 8,000 to like 2,000. I think it's 2,500.
So it's like the buddy rate.
Yeah, yeah. And I was like, okay, that's odd that you're going to charge me 8,000 and automatically discount it $5,500 on a phone call, right? So anyway, that was one. And then I got the bill, and I called them back after I got the $2,500 bill, and I said, man, this is really, really hard for me to pay. Can you give it to me for 1,500? And they said, well, how much can you pay? And I said, boy, I could pay $50 a month. Now think about that, 2,500 divided by $50 a month. I'm going to be paying them for a lot of months, right? Yeah. And they said, I tell you what, yeah, let's do that. We'll just have you pay $50 a month until the 2,500 is paid off. And I said, what about if I just paid you 1,800 right now? I could put it on a credit card. I'll pay my credit card off. And they did it. So they were trying to convince me into $50 a month that would go for 2.5 years or whatever it was. And they ended up taking one lump sum for 1,800. So my bill, just by making a couple phone calls, went from 8,000 to 1,800. Secondary point, we had an epidural from the anesthesiologist. And I was sitting there, first child, and I'm videotaping everything that's going on, right? Yeah. He sticks the needle in my wife's back, and as he's pulling it out, he's trying to put the epidural, catheter thing in her spine. And as he pulls it out, the whole thing comes out and it starts to bleed. And he looks up at me at the camera and he says, well, we might have to redo that one. And so he redoes it and it works. Okay, no big deal. I got a video of it. It's all good. I'm documenting. I'm not trying to, corner this doctor or anything. So I get the bill from the anesthesiologist, and it's $2,200. I call the insurance company and I said, how much would you normally charge? Because the hospital said, we'll give you the insurance rate, right? So I called the insurance company. I said, how much would you charge for an epidural? Can you look it up? They looked it up and they said, well, for a normal epidural, we'll do it or we'll pay the doctor $800. I'm getting a bill for $2,200. And I called the anesthesiologist and I said, hey, can we negotiate this? I know that it's going to only be $800 and it's $2,200 is what you're charging me. And they said, well, as I look through the records here, it looks like he did extra stuff for you. And I said, yeah, he did. He did. He put 2 of them in because he pulled the first one out and it didn't take, and she was bleeding, so he had to clean that up and put the second one in. And she said, the woman on the phone says, let me put you on hold real quick. And she put me on hold, and she walks away or does whatever she's doing in the background, comes back on, and she said, I think we can do it for $800, and discounts it from $2,200 to $800. And I said, listen, I don't want to twist your arm.
Substantial
I'll give you $900 for it. And she goes, okay, that's fine. So yeah. I didn't want to be the asshole.
Yeah, you fluffed a little bit.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So I gave him a little bit more.
Still less than 50% of the original bill, though.
Yeah, yeah. But it was the anesthesiologist put down that they did more work when they didn't. It just didn't take or whatever, it didn't happen. So they had to go get the next anesthesia, kit or whatever to redo it. And that charge was astronomical. I'll give you a third example. twisted my ankle. I went to the foot doctor. The foot doctor said, yeah, we're going to put you in a walking boot, and we'll keep on it. It'll cushion you, whatever, and you'll be okay in a few days or weeks or whatever it was. So I get the explanation of benefits from the insurance company. It says for the walking boot, it was charged $250. We've discounted it to $175, and you only owe $102 for that boot. And I was like, man, that's a lot. But, I paid the doctor the $102 because they sent me a bill. You owe us $102. I looked at the boot. It had a little tag on the little whatever. I Googled that boot, and I could have bought it online. This is back in, 2010 or something. I could have bought it from Amazon for $27. The exact same boot for $27 I could have ordered. But because I got it from the doctor's office marked it up. They probably paid too much for it from the distributor or the manufacturer or whatever. So it was $225. United Healthcare said, hey, we're doing you a favor, and we're discounting it to $175, of which you only owe $102.
Just all smoke and mirrors bullshit.
Yeah. And I'm like, so I got to pay $102. You paid the doctor $73. The doctor got a tax write-off for the $50 you discounted them. And I could have just gone to Amazon and got it in 2 days for $25.
That's why
$30.
That's insane. That's why I always talk to you in the construction game that I think discounts are bullshit. Just there's discounts in certain sectors of business or industry that sort of makes sense. If there is a regular going price, sometimes people do honestly discount things, whatever. But I've worked for people in the past that are like, we'll just add this and then show a discount. That's dumb. Right. You're just not a good enough salesperson or business person or whatever you want to call it if you just can't articulate that this is my price at a given value and it should be worth it, right? If you got to mess around with discounts, but that's insanity. Yeah. It still was only a third of what you ended up paying in actual costs.
Yeah. So it's unreal.
So I just, at the end of the day, though, if price gouging or this inflative, it's like the Toon Squad drinking Michael's special water or whatever in the movie Space Jam back in the day, right? It's it's just the same fucking water that you can get over here, but because they say it's great or whatever, you got to pay this exorbitant amounts of money for it. But if you just immediately go, how do you decipher between regulating to a point where you can't price gouge? Can you regulate that, or does competition have to be incentivized? Because I keep going back to the competition thing. And I think the only way to fairly, without government overstepping, the only way to truly reduce the cost of anything is more competition.
Yeah. I think it's both in the healthcare space. We need more competition. And I'll give you another quick example, but we need more competition, but we also need to have the federal government and or state governments step in and say, this is for the better good of our society, the public good. And when there's a public interest, the public good, the governments have stepped in the past and said, we need to look at this, and
especially when you bring up the statistic of how many bankruptcies are on behalf of this. I do think that is cause for concern from a government level.
Yeah. And now I forgot my example.
Well, bringing it back to public concern at a state level, in terms of regulating.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I can't.
Well, it's to me there's a comparison to what this administration is talking about doing with credit card interest rates. Just because of the amount of people that find themselves in the amount of credit card debt that they do at 20% interest or whatever it gets up to, they're essentially saying, hey, that's a lot. Why don't we just cap this at 10 or 11? You're still making all the money, but that's too much. Would that be a similar scenario where now it incentivizes people to maybe be more creative or better for the public?
Yeah. And so the balance is, what's public good and where is the market? Where would the market be for competition, right? So again, if the government sets the price ceiling, guess what the price is going to be? The price ceiling, right? Everybody is going to race to that. Every manufacturer is going to say, if the government sets it there, that's where we're going, right? So if there's competition and the government controls the price, who's going to be the low price? You're going to get all the business at the low price, right? So with competition and price, setting by the federal government is just a race to inflation, in my opinion. But if we didn't have government intervention and we had competition and there were many, many, many home builders, everybody's going to set somewhere in that ecosystem. Now, that's not to say that, you build high-end houses, right? You build all kinds of houses, but you build a high-end house, you're going to charge a high-end price for it. And there's a way to differentiate that as well. So you get what you can out of it. When we talk about healthcare, you get to buy it one time. If you're going to have cancer or you're dying of cancer or a heart problem, you don't care what the price is, because without healthcare, you're going to die. So it doesn't matter if it's $1 million or it's $10,000. Your family is going to have to deal with it if you pass away, or you're going to have to deal with it eventually with bankruptcy situations or what have you. So there's really not a true market when you talk about healthcare.
Yeah, because it's like, what's it worth to you? How do you set a
what's
value
it worth
on
to you?
saving a life? Yeah.
I could go to the chiropractor, but I'll probably be okay, or whatever. In your situation with Stolera or whatever, you need it, or it could cause other stuff. In my situation with insulin, I need it or I'm going to die. Now you say, okay, what's the right price? That's where I think the government has to look at the market and say, okay, wait a second here. You guys are gouging the market. And they did to an extent on insulin in the Medicare space, but they had more control in Medicare because it's a government program, right? If the private sector were to squeeze the insulin manufacturers, Eli Lilly being one, well, they have multiple drugs. So if they're getting squeezed on one drug, they're going to inflate it on another. You're a general contractor, you build houses. If your plumber is squeezing you for more money, you might squeeze, somebody else for the electrician. Or
companies aren't just going to say, hey, my net margin is 20%. We'll just use as an example now. I'll just take 15.
Right.
They're overall net margin that it behooves them to try to figure out how to stay at that 20. So they're going to figure out where to get it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And if they're doing a lot of home building, they're the plumber for a lot of home buildings, or the electrical, and you say, really, I need to, we're over budget. I need a little bit here. We can make it up on this other one where I'm under budget. They might be able to do that. But at the end of the day, it's aggregate in what they're doing, right? And it's if I'm doing 20 houses, I might make 15% on one, or I might make 10% on one, but as long as I can get to 20 or 25 on another, I'm even, right? At my goal of whatever the profit margin is or whatever. And I see that in the daycare space. I lose money in the daycare world, childcare world, when they're infants, because the ratio that the government sets is 1 employee for every 4 babies, right? But as they get older, they're more self-sustained. And when they're, preschool, I have 1 employee for, 16 or 15 or whatever the ratio is.
But as a business person, it obviously makes sense to get them in at that early age, or if the older one has siblings, and then eventually you're going to keep them there. And
Right. So you look for the, infant to 8-year-old, that's preschool or just going to school and needs somebody to pick them up or whatever. You aggregate, what's the word? So, aggregate the whole time. And you say, I can lose money on the baby, but I know that eventually the loss is going to be, overcome, and I'm going to make a little bit at the end.
Yeah. So, I mean, essentially to tie it all back in, it's like if you just target one drug, and insulin is a popular one, especially in commercials, I mean, it's going to affect, there's going to be a ripple effect, there is for sure. So, I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see, and it might even be interesting in like 2 years' time to revisit this conversation and see how the landscape has changed with this given administration. The fact that they do have the House and the Senate, and just if anything will change, or if it was all just BS talk, and
Yeah.
we'll know.
And they don't have the House yet. They think that they're going to have the House.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
right. And it's the same predicament, so to speak, that Obama had. When you control everything, all your constituents can get anything they want. Right. And it's the same thing that Trump's going to face. All of his constituents in the Republican controlled Congress is going to want something. And it's going to be, do I just give it away or not? And we've got this $35 trillion plus sitting over our head as a cloud. What are we going to do? I look at Governor Reynolds here in Iowa. She has a super majority in both houses, which means they don't need one opposing person to pass anything they want. I think she's going to have the toughest 2 years that she could possibly have right now, because everything that every Republican wants to do is going to be put on her desk.
So there's gonna be less challenge in general for these people. So like they're gonna be, yeah. I mean that could be interesting too, because I mean you're just gonna get like it's just gonna all be presented without challenge.
Well, again, think of. When you look at Washington, D.C., Congress runs on committees. Yeah. So you've got 386 or whatever, 486
whoever chairs
representatives.
Those committees is an extremely important person in terms of getting things through.
And it's the same way at the state. The committees aren't as big, but it's the same way. Well, if you've got a supermajority on the education committee at the state of Iowa, and of that supermajority, that means that 2/3 of the people on that committee are going to be thinking the same way. Right. And they might come up with something that's maybe not so good for Iowans. Yeah. And I'm not suggesting that they would, but you can. It's easy to go off on a tangent when you've got everybody thinking the same way. Yeah.
Groupthink can be dangerous in any regard, for sure.
Yeah. And so now Governor Reynolds is going to have to look at that and say, okay. And the leaders of the House and the leaders of the Senate on the Republican side are going to say, okay, let's back up here a little bit. Let's think these things through.
Hopefully that's when, to tie it all back to the very beginning and kind of wrap this all together, is hopefully that's where you can rely back on those fundamentals. Like that's where, and Reynolds being in that position as long as she has, and I think is a prominent enough figure that I think she'll feel okay, like staying strong in her beliefs, or I hope.
I'm sure she will.
Yeah, and I think she will too. But it is important at that point, especially to back to the fundamental rule of like, hey, government doesn't overstep. This is our job, just to paint the lines like you talked about. Because if you get too handsy and all of a sudden now you're trying to play head coach and quarterback, that's when things can fall apart.
And you're setting the rules for the field.
Yeah.
And you're saying, what, let's make the end zone a little bit bigger because, we like the toe tap, but we want some more space.
Right.
Whatever.
Yeah, 100%.
And I'm all for, in our analogy, I'm all for the players on the field and the government and the referees and whoever paints the field to get out of the way and let American ingenuity go and let us fix the problems and find the solutions.
Yeah, I mean, the government didn't tell us how to build rockets and then have their boosters be caught.
Right.
That was a private sector. Yeah, it was a private sector business that the government is actually trying to stand in the way of.
Yeah,
which is crazy. But yeah, well, awesome, man. I appreciate your time. This was quite the conversation.
Yeah, it was.
I think a follow-up will be needed just because my mind is just racing right now with different thoughts and questions and whatever. But
it's fun.
Yeah,
I'll talk healthcare about anytime.
No, I really appreciate the insight, and I think there's
fun, but
I think there's a lot of caveats to your world where the common person just doesn't understand a lot of it, including myself. I mean, there's so many tiers and levels to this stuff that you think something can just seem obvious or easily changed, but there's just ripple effects everywhere that you have to sort of figure out all those caveats to it. So
There's more than one finger in the pie, that's for sure.
yeah, for sure.